Welcome to the Daily Insider here on VegasInsider.com. I am Kevin Rogers for Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021, and that is Mitch Moss of Follow the Money on VSiN, right in the middle of the screen. So you see him nice and clearly. He is wide awake. He's been up all day, but he's giving us a few minutes today to join us here in the Daily Insider. Mitch, we appreciate it. How are you?
It's good to talk to you again, man. Thanks for having me.
I have a lot of things I want to go over with you, and number one, you obviously are based in Las Vegas. The news this past week about the Vegas Golden Knights, and they partnered with a quote-unquote tout service, and that lasted about 24 hours, and then the public outcry came, and then they scrapped it. What was the reaction out in Vegas? I mean, for me, we'll talk, I'll get your opinion, I'll give you my opinion, but I just think that this probably wasn't the best idea from the start. I don't know who green-lighted it and then went through with it and then thought, okay, where's the public? Why would the public get upset about this? But the public obviously was upset. What did you think about the whole thing?
Well, I thought it was bizarre. I mean, first of all, do you know anybody who's ever heard of that company before?
No.
I mean, a lot of people. I know a lot of people. I've lived out here for 20 years. I don't know one person who lives out here who said, "Oh yeah, you pick trade." Sure, I've heard of them. Not one person did. So that, I mean, it's just like what your question is perfect, because like, where did that start from? Where was the vetting process? Like in the front office and with management with the Golden Knights, were they so aloof to think that we're just going to sign this deal and it's going to look great because we have a big time sponsor now on board and we're embracing gambling, and there's never going to be any backlash for this? And I think the local media made a big stink about it. Social media was up in arms over the whole thing. And so it didn't take long. It took like 2 or 3 days after the announcement. And it was so heavy coming from the public and the pressure that they just said, no, we got to scrap this whole thing. And I guess I don't know where they're going to go from there. But the whole thing, I mean, it was just, I had to do like a triple take. Like, hold on a second. It's who? What? Where are they from? It was so weird. So unpredictable. Came out of left field.
What was your biggest issue with it personally when you saw it go down?
To be honest, so I think once you saw some of the claims that the site was making, like you can basically, and I didn't do, digging for 24 hours on it or whatever, but you can bet on sports full time, 300% ROI, certain things, their claims were just, I think that people based in Las Vegas, once they would see something like that, they'd say, yeah, no, sorry, can't be involved with something like that. And there are a lot of, good people in this industry from top to bottom, and there are some shady people, right? But when you see stuff like that, it's like you gotta like hit the brakes here for a second. So that was the number one thing that threw me off. Like, if you just did a little bit of digging, like right on the surface, you're like, that's not possible. And then, like, and again, they're in Mexico, right? This was the part that kind of baffled me. How much money do they have to spend with an NHL team? It wasn't, it wasn't the Golden Knights, signing a deal with Coke or McDonald's. It was a company that nobody in the States had ever heard of before. So I like, what are they real? That part again was really, really stunning to me. How about you?
Somebody said, Mitch, it was a good point. They said on Twitter when this whole thing went down, that what if this is a sports tout service and they say, okay, tonight, here's our pick. We're going to take the Colorado Avalanche against the Vegas Golden Knights. That's our pick for tonight. So you're partnering with a team that could potentially say, we're going against your team. And what if they are right in 5 straight games? What if they go against Vegas in 5 straight games and they're right in all those games? So you're trying to not root for the Golden Knights because you think they're going to lose because they say to go against them. That was my biggest problem, is you didn't think this out. They're partners, but yet they could basically say, well, we think you guys are going to lose tonight.
Sure. No, that's a great angle. And, there's absolutely something to that, because again, imagine the people that they're trying to reach, which would be, season ticket holders. The city here is Golden Knight crazy, has been since the inception. So those are the same people that you're telling to, like, hey, watch the game tonight and everything. But I got to tell you, bet against them because we don't like the Golden Knights in this game tonight. So the whole thing was just weird from the get-go.
Let's look at some college basketball now, Mitch. And in the Horizon League last night, you had one of the craziest nights you'll ever see. One of them Wright State up 72-48 on Milwaukee. 6:26 to go, up 24, and they ended up losing. They were laying, I think, 17 in that one. You had some crazy finishes. Detroit lost at the buzzer. Also, Cleveland State and Fort Wayne, they had a wild finish. That some of these games, I mean, now we are literally at March Madness.
Oh, I mean, welcome to 2021 in college basketball. I mean, the calendar said March 2nd last night. And if that's any indication of what we're going to be in store for the next, 3 to 4 weeks, it's going to be unbelievable. The horizon can usually be a little off the rails, and you might have a bunch of lower seeds get in. But for that to happen, and all those games were basically going on at the same exact time, because I think 3 of them started at 7 o'clock Eastern, and the 4th game started at 7:30. So here you have 3 of the games combining to go to 5 overtimes, because the Cleveland State game went to triple overtime, and the other game. And I had Detroit on a ticket at 8 to win the conference tournament, and things opened up beautifully for them. The problem is they got beat. So they're up 69-64 with 3:45 to play under the last, media timeout, and they never scored again. And there was I think Northern Kentucky had 3 or 4 chances. And as the final shot is going off the player's hand, the backboard screen lights up. So it was good. And then it goes off, in time, I should say, and then it goes off the glass and in. And that's how they walk away the winner. So that was absolutely bonkers. And then for, Wright State to be the co-champs of the conference, to be that big of a favorite, to have a 17-point lead at halftime. You said the score, it was like 24 points with 6. How do you blow a game when you have a 26-point lead with under 7 minutes to play? That should be impossible. In fact, that's at that point, Kevin, in-play wagering is probably taken down at almost every book on the game, because it's the algorithm can't even spit you out that big of a number for what the odds were for Milwaukee to come back and win it. But what a night it was last night. But that wasn't the only thing. I mean, how about Boise going down in a game they couldn't lose as 13.5 or 14-point favorites? That was nuts. You had the Georgia Tech Duke game, where that had to do with the total. Georgia Tech had 64 points with 4 minutes and 47 seconds left to go in the game. They never scored again in regulation. And Duke came back to tie it up, goes to overtime. They combined for 30 points in OT. So that game, of course, goes over the total. It was shenanigans across the board. But it all started at 2 o'clock Pacific time with that unbelievable Baylor-West Virginia game.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, where Baylor's up big. They're up double digits in the first half. They needed a 3-pointer in the final seconds to cover the first half, because West Virginia came all the way back to take the lead, and Baylor hits that 3, and then West Virginia, it seemed like, was in control in the second half. Baylor ties to go to overtime, and then Baylor gets the dreaded front door cover in overtime. They win by 5. I mean, what a game between those two teams, because it looked like Baylor was finally going to bounce back after the Kansas loss, but then it seemed like in the second half, Mitch, oh, well, here we go. Baylor's going to go down. But still, what do you think about these teams moving forward, both Baylor and West Virginia? In spite of West Virginia's loss, they're still going to be a threat in the tournament, but also with Baylor now trying to get their feet under them after they were off for a few weeks.
I think, this is only going to be a good thing for Baylor. We saw them. They were obviously very sluggish against a bad Iowa State team. First loss of the year against Kansas, and probably should have lost against West Virginia. I think they're going to be just completely fine. They have so much talent. They're so physical. They can beat you in a lot of different ways. They can beat you from downtown. They can beat you inside as well, play really good defense. I think they're going to be fine. And I mean, when you look now, West Virginia, they have 7 losses on the year. They don't really have a bad loss. I mean, yes, they lost to Gonzaga, and that score, if I recall correctly, had a big margin, but it was closer than what the score actually indicated. And they, when you look at the other teams that they actually have an L in the win-loss column against, none of those teams are bad. So I think West Virginia is going to be a major problem in the tournament for a lot of teams. And I think, Fran Fraschilla on the broadcast yesterday, he was spot on. He said this is the best offensive team that West Virginia has had since the 2010 team. That team actually beat Kentucky in the Elite Eight. The Kentucky team that had John Wall, Cousins, and Bledsoe, they had an injury in that game, and they eventually lost to Duke in the Final Four. Best guard play, best offense for a West Virginia team probably in about 10 years. So, and plus they're going to be completely tested out of the Big 12. Both those teams are just, ultra dangerous coming up this year.
We talked about the horizon before, Mitch, and now we're going to eventually transition into the bigger conferences getting their tournaments. The Atlantic 10 started today. We're starting to see also the smaller conferences play as well. Do you have any angles, anything that you like to look at? I know this year, again, tough because pandemic and all this other stuff, but you're still playing at a neutral site, in the bigger conferences. Anything that you're looking at when you move forward into these conference tournaments? I know they're always hard to handicap.
Oh, they certainly are. Some of the teams at the very top, and, I would include Michigan in that until last night with that blowout loss to Illinois. I think some of the teams like a Michigan, like a Baylor, and certainly Gonzaga out here, they've been so dominant that their numbers were going to be, Gonzaga, forget about it in their conference. But they've lost in this tournament before when they've been really good. Now, this is probably the best team that they've ever had. But I think some of the teams at the top of these conferences, like I brought up, they've been so good throughout the year that you can actually find some pretty good plus money on teams a little bit lower down. Like, for example, in the Big 12. It is no shoo-in that Baylor is going to win this thing. Yes, they're going to be a 1 seed. I don't care if they lose whatever, how many times going from now until Selection Sunday. They have to be a 1 seed. But they're going to present some pretty good value on teams like maybe a Texas Tech because it's now March. And I'm telling you, during tournament play, there aren't many better guys in the country than Chris Beard, having teams ready to go on a day-in, day-out basis. Maybe a team like Oklahoma State who's coming on, and I bet them recently to win the national title, although their whole thing is still weird. They're eligible as of right now, from what I understand, but the NCAA could rule something kooky with that team. But that's the kind of example I would look at in the bigger conferences where the teams that have been so dominant, it's not a shoo-in they're going to win these leagues, so you can find some pretty good value with teams that are, just maybe a tier or two below them.
Mitch, I know it's always impossible to say, well, I think Loyola Chicago is going to make the Final Four when they did and when George Mason did years ago and VCU and all these other teams. Are there a handful of teams you're thinking of that could make some kind of run from these mid-majors?
Well, from the mid-major, I think Loyola could probably do it again this year. I don't think Drake's injuries now probably caught up to him a little bit too much. And although tricky. It stinks for that team because they were so good, as we all know, winning all their games and then covering every single game to begin with. But I can't. Well, Lenardi hasn't been, I think, is the last 4 as of right now. I think they're good chance for one and done or losing in the second round. But why not Loyola again? I think that guy's a really good coach, and I think that team can get you to play their style of play in a 40-minute game, and they can dictate how it's going to go and put you through a meat grinder on defense. That team sticks out. That's probably the best of the bunch. I don't know if Belmont can this year, although they've had an injury. A team like that could come out, maybe be a 10 or 11 seed. I'm trying to think of other teams. Who do you have top of your mind that would stick out? Some of these mid-majors, drawing a blank. Winthrop, would you see that team maybe potentially doing something? Plus, you also have to see what the field is going to look like, and what their matchup's going to be in round 1. I'll give you an example. Like, I don't think Wisconsin's very good. I think they could be had by a bunch of teams in the country. So if they would draw a mid-major in round 1, I would probably give some of those teams we just talked about an edge or a chance to actually win that game. I don't think Tennessee is very good. Now, both those teams I just brought up, their seeds have been dropping over recent weeks. But if Tennessee would somehow get a mid-major in round 1, I think they can be had. So I think that's what it boils down to is, a lot of times who they're going to get in that first round, what kind of coach they're going to take on. And then just depending beyond that, what the possible matchups look at in, the second round of Sweet 16.
Because the lack of travel, Mitch, now everyone's going to Indiana. No, there's no way they can say, well, we went out west, we're traveling east, we're doing all this other stuff. Everyone's in the same state. No one's going that far. So you don't have the travel as a factor. And, I just really wonder if, how much of a difference that's going to make or not. But also, looking at some other major teams, I guess we call them, and I want your thoughts on these before we go to the NBA. Teams like Alabama, Arkansas that have made these runs. Alabama's had a great season. Arkansas undefeated in the SEC in their last 9 games, and they lost to Oklahoma State in the middle of that. But some of these other major teams, I know you talk about Tennessee and Wisconsin you're not buying into, but who else below Baylor and Gonzaga and Michigan that you said, okay, this is a team that definitely can make a Final Four run?
So I bought in on Florida State. Probably a month or so ago, give or take, got him at 50-1. When I watch that team, Kevin, and You're from that state. You live there now. Did you go there?
Yes, I went to Florida State.
Went to Florida State. That's what I thought. So you would know better than me. But I'm telling you, like, whenever I watch his team play, it's probably 4 out of 5 times I watch him play, and I think nobody ever talks about Hamilton as a really good coach. Nobody ever talks about how much talent he really has at that program over the years, not just this year, but over the last handful of years. They always have like either pro talent or really good talent on that team. And I think when I watch him play, like, again, 4 out of 5 times, I'm like, they can make a deep run, maybe Final Four, maybe even better than that. And it's like that 5th game, I watch the second half against North Carolina, and I'm like, well, what the hell happened after halftime when you had a 12-point lead? And it completely turned around at that point, and the Tar Heels, took them up beyond that. But I'm kind of, I'm on 50-1. I like that number. I don't like, and I think I made the mistake, well, maybe this year. I don't like buying teams that could be potentially peaking too early. And I do have a ticket on Alabama at 60-1. They're probably going to be about a 2 seed. I think they're really good. I like him as a coach. But is there a chance, because they went through that stretch when they were killing everybody, and they had that game, I think it was against LSU, when they scored 60 at halftime and they couldn't miss. And I was like looking at my ticket at 61. I'm like, okay, I'm glad I'm in on this team. But maybe they just got a little bit too hot too early. We've seen that in prior years. Another team out of the ACC, I want to make a case for Virginia. I have them on a ticket as well. But when you go back and look at their overall resume, there is not a lot of meat on the bone. They're just, they don't have a lot of great wins, in my opinion. I could be wrong on that. It doesn't stand out, like a sore thumb. I have Creighton, but they have to be fully healthy. And now the situation with the head coach, who the hell knows how that's going to go. And who's the other team? I do have a big ticket on USC. That's a pretty good number. But I don't know. You tell me. Florida State, did you bet them yet this year? Or do you think they can make a deep run?
No, I didn't. And you're right about them. And it's like they're on the precipice of getting to the Final Four. They've had these times where they are so close. And like you said, that North Carolina game, I mean, shoot, they should have lost to Wake Forest. I mean, that game, Wake Forest was terrible. I mean, and again, FSU was also off of the long layoff, and we've seen the layoffs kill these teams this year. Like you mentioned, Baylor against Iowa State that they barely won. So everybody's not going to be, worried about layoffs, but FSU is definitely a team that can do it. I think they could be at least a Sweet 16 Elite 8 team. I'm not sure once you're facing the big boys after that if they could win. Because think about this, Mitch, and I mean, I'm telling you something like you don't know it, but you win 3 games just to get to the Elite 8. You still got 3 more to go. You're facing 3 heavyweights probably.
That's a great point. It really is. And that, by the way, like that should be looked upon as a really good season for like almost every program in the country. But because they don't make this thing called the Final Four, disappointing season for a bunch of teams, which is just like, really? Wow, that's strange to me. But you're right. I think more than likely Florida State, Sweet 16, Elite 8. And then if they catch a break or two, all right? I mean, if the other half of the bracket opens up and there's some upsets and they happen to have a great shooting day, and then suddenly, look at this, they slid in the Final Four where maybe anything can happen. Iowa had a great performance recently. They looked awesome in that win that they had against Ohio State over the weekend. That was they're a lot of fun to watch, Kevin, obviously because of Garza and the offense and McCarthy, the head coach. Sorry, my dog's suddenly going nuts here. Offensively, they're going to get the job done. Ken Pom has them rated number 2 overall with the offensive efficiency. I can't buy into the defense, though, and I can't buy into this team as someone that's going to make a very long run and be a potential title contender. I just don't see it from Iowa, although they're a sexy team to watch and to have on television, and just the way that they can bomb threes and score a ton of points. I can't fully get there with them, and I don't think the Big Ten beyond Michigan, I have to add Illinois to that list. Really, it's a good conference, but beyond those top 2 teams, I don't see a title contender anywhere in that conference. Like, with Iowa, Penn State, Purdue, Wisconsin, any of them.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how many the Big Ten gets coming up in a few weeks. I want to go to the NBA now, Mitch, and I mean, you follow everyone, but you follow the Bucks a little closer. You're from Wisconsin originally. Tell me if my theory's crazy. They lost to Denver last night. I feel like the pandemic hurt them more than anybody. That they were rolling, and then when the pandemic hit last year, they had the break, and then they just didn't look as good in the playoffs. They didn't look very sharp going to Orlando in the bubble. And this year, they're still going to win the Central by default because the Central stinks. And Milwaukee's obviously the best team. But Do you think, and I know it's hard to take one game like the Denver game because they had lost 5 straight, then won 5 straight, and then lost last night. What's your thoughts on the Bucks as far as now the Nets are loaded with Harden and Durant and Kyrie? How far do you think Milwaukee can go?
I don't love them. I really don't. And I'm not going to say that their window is closed or anything crazy like that, because they'll add guys, because Giannis signed the super max and he's going to be there for a long time. The Nets are too good. I mean, can you see the Bucks outscoring that team for 4 games out of 7 in a series? I just can't see it. When they get everybody back, and it's going to be Harden and Irving and KD, and then if somehow Giannis is going to go for 27 and 14 rebounds, but maybe Middleton has an off night, then what? I mean, can you count on DiVincenzo and other guys to match bucket for bucket with Harden and Irving and KD? I can't at all. And by the way, we saw it again recently in one of their matchups with Toronto. This is now year number 3 for Budenholzer as the head coach. He won the coach of the year 2 years ago. He absolutely deserved it. The problem when they got to the playoffs was Toronto and Nick Nurse figured out to build this wall, and the Bucks had a 2-0 lead in that series in the Eastern Conference Finals. They built this wall defensively for Giannis, and he couldn't do anything about it. Once he hit that wall, it was like seriously a car hitting a brick wall. Just bam. And the facilitating, getting the ball out, finding open shooters, it was a major problem for him. Why am I watching a game in 2021 that looks identical to that from 3 years ago? You haven't made any adjustments with that. You haven't really watched videotape, and I know they have, obviously, with Giannis to think about, but where's the game plan? How come that's still a problem? So to me, if that's still easily defendable, right, that's a major issue for that team to be who they are during the regular season. And then not only do the Nets get better, I mean, Embiid is playing like an MVP. I think the 76ers, and I like some of the additions they made in the offseason. How could you not? That's a better team. And when the Heat are fully healthy, I still have, in my head trying to envision how that series is going to go, because I love the Heat against them last year in the playoffs. And I bet them every which way I possibly could. And that was a 5-game series. I still don't know if the Bucks can get by the Heat. So now I do think the Heat were the number 1 team that gave them problems last year. But now you have the Heat, you have the Nets, I would say the 76ers. That's at least 3 teams right there, in my opinion, that will be absolute trouble for the Bucks come playoff time.
Now, I'm going to show our viewers the MVP odds, because you mentioned some of these guys. All right, LeBron's the favorite. You have Embiid, Jokic, Luka Doncic, Steph, Giannis, Durant, Lillard, Harden. I mean, this list is unbelievable. I mean, everyone would think LeBron would get it again, but who do you think right now, or who would you choose as the MVP at the midway point?
Okay, I would probably choose Embiid. That's also coming from a guy who's slightly biased. I do have Embiid at 13-1. I have a handful of guys to win the MVP, but Embiid is one of them at 13-1. I just think that he's been incredible. And when you look at the games where he hasn't played, the record, I believe, is 1-5 without him now. Done a fantastic job. He's gotten better, averaging almost 30 points, 11 rebounds a game. Been so valuable to this team. And just, again, without him, what would that team look like? Small sample size, 1-5 so far, 1-6 in that range. But it would not be good. I would lean him. I can't go Joker, although right now he has the highest player efficiency rating in history. It's actually higher than Giannis's was last year. Look what happened last night with a 37-point triple-double in their 30-point blowout win at Milwaukee. I don't think voters will look at a player on a team where Denver's record is going to be and acknowledge him. Could be dead wrong on that. I think that happened once with Westbrook, because he averaged that triple-double and they got caught up with the silly numbers when he did that. They gave him the MVP. But I don't think they'll do that with Joker. At least I don't have a ticket on him. So I'm fading him this year, and that's why I'm saying that. But, I mean, I would not be surprised if he's playing at such a high level of basketball. He would probably actually deserve the award. Can you rule out Harden right now? With what he has meant, Nets' highest offensive rating in the history of the league as we speak. KD's missing a bunch of games. When Kyrie goes out, they've been fine. They lost to Dallas without him, but other than that, they've been okay. And I think some of the people will hold that 8-game stint with Houston at the beginning of the season against him. Who knows? Talk to me in 2 months if that's going to be an issue. Should LeBron really be where he's at with the odds? Again, this is a narrative award, and you basically have to bet on voters as much as you're betting on the player to win the award. And we learned last year that voters love LeBron. That could be Captain Obvious checking in. But when you had people on national television who vote on that award tell you that it's his 17th season and he had to put up with Kobe's death and that thing that happened in China before the season started. And I'm like, but what does any of that have to do with how he's playing on the court? Like, it means nothing. Clearly, he's not a better player or more valuable than Giannis was last year. It was silly talk. But you had voters actually saying, yep, let me write his name down. He's going to get the first place vote from me. So it's tricky. But I saw again today at one spot, he's like plus 175. How? Liability, I guess would be the only reason why. But I would say those are probably the top four. But I mean, you're right. The list is like, what, 10, 11, 12 players deep who you can actually bring up in the conversation?
I mean, Mitch, again, I'm looking at this, and you just see all these guys, and you can make separate arguments for everybody. You said Embiid and what he's done. He's put up terrific numbers. Jokic and what he has done in Denver. Where are they without him? Where are the Mavs without Luka? I mean, shoot, even the Warriors without Steph. I mean, that team is horrible if Steph isn't there. Durant's hard because he's been hurt. I mean, and he's not going to win it. But Damian Lillard, where are the Blazers without him?
Sure. And I'll give you another one. What if the Jazz have had a couple of losses lately? That's okay. They were on one of the hottest stretches in recent memory. What if they run away with the West, with the 1 seed? Will they look at Donovan Mitchell and give him like any benefit of the doubt whatsoever? Or is that going to be split between too many players? Because they'll look at Gobert. He's great defensively, puts up good numbers. They're incredible from downtown shooting the three. Will they kind of split votes from Utah, or will they say that, there's not one player on that team that really sticks out, that should get the award?
It's going to be a team award. That's what it's going to be like the Hawks a few years ago. It's going to be, it's a whole bunch of really good players, but not one great player. So we'll see what happens with them. I want to go back to Harden for a second. He goes to Houston tonight, Nets and Rockets, and Houston has been atrocious, to say the least, what they've done or haven't done offensively of late. But you talk about James Harden and your thoughts on him being maybe the MVP, that he's the only steady guy with the Nets, with Durant on the shelf and Kyrie playing every few games and not playing. Harden's just out there every single night. He keeps producing.
He's a complete bulldog. I mean, and we saw that, he's playing a lot of minutes. The game the other night against the Spurs, I was watching the game, paying attention to the box score at the same exact time. At one point, I think it was like 204 from the floor. He's getting everybody else involved, and he almost had like 10 assists. I'm like, wow, okay, so he's really, truly getting everybody involved. And I think at halftime, it was like 10 assists to 7 shots, whatever. And then in the fourth quarter and overtime, when they needed somebody to get buckets, what did he do? I think he scored like 20 points in the final portion of the fourth quarter and overtime to help the Nets in that game. They covered it. It was a weird game. They're favored by 4.5 in that game. They eventually covered it in overtime. But I thought that was a great example, again, where he just was like being the facilitator, the point guard, a lot of it. And then when it mattered most, again, crunch time, let me take over the contest right now. And that's another guy, by the way. If people are going to give LeBron so much credit for playing every single game, and he's not tonight against the Kings, and good for LeBron. I think that's amazing in his 18th year that he's going out there and trying to play every single night. Does Harden ever take nights off? Absolutely not. He doesn't. He's a total warrior. And again, I don't know if he's going to win the award or not, but what he's done, I actually enjoy watching him play with the Nets infinitely more than I liked him when he was with Houston. I couldn't stand the herky-jerky nonsense, always, getting guys in the air, then going like this, leaning in for the foul, and going to the free throw line 17, 18 times. This version already with James Harden, to me, is much more appealing to watch than the Houston guy that we watched for so many years.
Before I let you go, Mitch, I know you guys talked about it on Follow the Money. Worst beat. Cavs Sixers over Saturday night, 37 points in overtime, and then Ben Simmons hits that ridiculous 3 to go over. Or in the Big West, if anybody missed this one, Cal Davis against Cal Poly Saturday, 68-66 win in overtime. Game stays under 136, but here's the caveat. There was 2 points scored in overtime.
Yeah, and they scored in the first possession of overtime, by the way, in the first 15 seconds. The worst beat, I got to tell you, if for anybody who makes like an end-of-year list, both those games have to be on the list, do they not? I mean, those are Simmons to hit that, that 3 from downtown, that far out. to put it over, over the total in overtime, crusher. I'm going to lead the college game, although it went to overtime, right? Well, both games did. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, the only way I can get beat is if it goes to overtime. And then somehow it does go to overtime, and you think clearly you're dead on the ticket, right? And then for that to actually happen, and I would say it's more of a great win than the bad beat. I mean, an unbelievable win. If you're on the under, that's the right side, and then all of a sudden, bam, you go to overtime, they get 2 points. It's unfathomable.
Obviously I didn't see the game. I'm sure you didn't see the game. A lot of people didn't see that game, the Big West game. But how do you get down there with no free throw attempts? It seems like,
right.
How do you do that? Like, that's almost impossible to do.
There's no fouls. You don't make a layup. There's nothing that happens. A loose ball, all of a sudden they go the other way. Got somebody leaking out for an easy layup in 5 minutes of basketball. That's an all-timer in my opinion.
Mitch Moss, he is the host of Follow the Money on VSiN and with Paulie Howard, and you can catch that every single morning on iHeartRadio now, and also on several TV networks, right?
That is correct. iHeartRadio is the big one, and expanding on TV quite a bit. So it's good. We're on in Pittsburgh now on AT&T there. We're on up in Canada, all across Sportsnet on a bunch of cities up there, every city, I think. And then Boston, Chicago, pretty good.
So pretty big time now. And you can find him on Twitter at Mitch Moss Radio as well. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us here on the Daily Insider. We'll talk to you again soon.
Kevin, it was fun talking to you. Thanks.
That is Mitch Moss. I am Kevin Rogers. We'll talk to you again tomorrow at 1 o'clock right here on the Daily Insider on our YouTube channel at VegasInsider.com.